Solana is the fastest, Solana is the most reliable.
I hear you when you say that Solana is cheaper, it's faster. Naturally, a lot of traders want to use it, a lot of retail users want to use it. But you mentioned reliable, and that's something I want to push back on. For those that don't necessarily know much about Solana, that are new to crypto, how would you sum up what Solana represents?
I would say Solana is basically the only blockchain you need for now. Think of Solana as a sandbox where you can basically try and build anything you want. And this is the same experience I, as an end user, might need. I might not be able to understand which blockchain I'm using, but since it's Solana, it's so fast, it's verifiable, no matter where you are. And even the ecosystem is as diverse as possible. Thinking about like more technical stuff like the Solana clients. You have Agave, you have Firedancer, you have a couple building and like different teams even involving here. And they're completely out of the blue spinning up new hackathons on Solana because Solana is the fastest, Solana is the most reliable. And if you think about institutions specifically, Solana is something where you have the verifiability being possible to manipulate. So Solana was built based on the consensus that you don't have to work in order to produce a new block. You don't have to stake in order to produce a new block, but you can have a new consensus mechanism, which was called proof of history. This would mean under the hood for the end user, it should be as transparent as possible. I don't have to think about whether I should be creating my meme coin on Solana or on other Ethereum or another chain. But since Solana is the most popular L1 if it comes to different, still L1 based apps, decentralized applications, I would say if you're about to join the crypto ecosystem, be Web3 native, start with Solana. Solana gives you the vast majority, like huge advantages if it comes to like even stable coins. Solana is among the top 2, top 3 blockchains where USDC, the Circle stablecoin with Tether is present. And of course, how much you can do with this, right? You want to store your crypto? Sure, that's possible. You want to game with your crypto? That's possible. You want to launch a token? That's also possible. And also the transaction fees, right? Where you think about it, right? Have you tried sending a Bitcoin, like a whole Bitcoin via the Bitcoin network? Like, how much does it cost you to send one Bitcoin? Sure, you have those wrapped assets joining more and more in like the general purpose public blockchain. And I would say there is no comparison to Solana nowadays, especially since the improvement that Solana is at, like the improvement pace, is something entirely new to the ecosystem, to be honest. Time to finality, also like 100x increase and all this stuff. Like it's amazing, to be honest, to be on board on Solana.
In all fairness, I probably shouldn't even include Bitcoin in the conversation because it's a different asset all in its own, right? But when you're talking about smart contract platforms and specifically Ethereum versus Solana, I hear you when you say that Solana is cheaper, it's faster, and so naturally, a lot of traders want to use it, a lot of retail users want to use it. But you mentioned reliable, and that's something I want to push back on because Solana has been down, I want to say like 9, 10 times over the course of the last 2, 3 years. And arguably, I feel like this is a reason why a lot of institutions might be more hesitant to adopt Solana versus Ethereum. And I understand that they're very much about move, move, move fast and go until it breaks. And then if it breaks, we'll fix it, right? But that approach is still kind of in development, though, right? What are your thoughts on this?
Very good question. So, in terms of how Solana did initially do their business, was all in one, I want to say, entity called Solana Labs. So they are the ones who were responsible for managing the whole like software that runs the blockchain. And ultimately, since I think 2023, the Jump Crypto team started working on a client called Firedancer, and the vanilla client that was initially built by Solana Labs got completely spun up into another entity, which is called Anza, and they're now responsible for the development of the client and the validator. We have seen no downtime in the last year. And if you think about institutions, it always matters like, what is your purpose? Like, what are you building? Are you building anything that allows you to be treated as a custodial wallet, right? Or what do you want to do? You want to play around with yields and think about capital efficiency, right? In the EVM ecosystem, it's very important to understand that you have so many L2s. It's not very reliable to think about a high transactional, and even like think of the MasterCards and Visas of the world. They're using Solana as their backbone for settlement. So I want to say there are already quite a lot of heavy institutions that are native to Solana.
I would say that Solana does a lot of things really good, but in terms of doing it the best, some argue that they're not necessarily the best at one specific thing. Surely they're great at trading. You've got amazing exchanges, and obviously you guys are working on one as well called Deriverse, which we'll learn about in a few minutes. But stablecoin volume is not the highest. That's more Ethereum, that's Tron for whatever reason. Even Hyperliquid, right? That's known to be as a trading chain. They're really focused on that. And you've got some competitors coming up like Fogo as well. So I'm curious to understand, like, what is Solana doing to really stay ahead of the pack? Because there's a lot of competitors in this space that are just nipping at the heels of Solana.
Maybe I can jump in real quick. So for me, Solana represents the best balance between decentralization and performance. As you mentioned, there are up and coming projects like Fogo, like various tweaks of Hyperliquid, but it seems to me that they often take the shortcut of exporting central elements of the protocol off chain to maximize performance. I would say they don't do enough on the decentralization part. So Solana really is, if you want to stay decentralized, fully on-chain, currently the best choice.
And what is the importance of decentralization for those that are really just care more about the user experience?
Well, I think the user experience itself, because the ethos of DEXs is basically built on the fact that the protocol is fully transparent, is fully custodial, permissionless. You can take these shortcuts and sacrifice all these value propositions, like in the name of performance, maximizing performance. But sooner or later, you will find out that these shortcuts are costly. Just this year, I don't know if you've noticed, but DYDX went down because an AWS server went down, right? Like this is not something that should happen to you when you're trading on a DEX. The DEX, like the only dependency of a DEX should be the underlying blockchain. Another example would be the Hyperliquid incident from March this year. So what happened there is that they got hacked or attacked, depends on how you look at it. And they had to shut down the market. And the founding team basically decided at what price the people who had open positions in that market got settled. On the one hand, it wasn't that bad from the perspective of the hack management. But on the other hand, I don't think that the users of this DEX were aware that this is something that can happen to them, that the founding team can essentially make these decisions. These are the arguments like why you would need total decentralization and on-chainness in a DEX.
For those that maybe not as technical, try to maybe dummy down this part of the conversation, but you have what are called clients, right? And they essentially impact the performance of the chain. And performance obviously means everything. It affects how well the chain does, the user experience, everything. So you have Fire Dancer, which everybody was excited about. Now, a lot of the builders and more of the technical folks are talking about Agave. What kind of role do they play in the performance of Solana?
Think of your user experience like browsing the web. You can be only as fast as the RSP allows you, right? And the more overhead the browser provides, the less pleasant is your browsing experience, right? And by having a diverse ecosystem of clients, which are focused on, I don't want to say different things, but Firedance is heavily focusing on the most what you can get out of a Solana blockchain in terms of transactions per second. Agave is, as of now, holds the majority of the validators, but it's still the OG on the block, and it's getting there in terms of improvements, performance, reliability, and there's so many things going just under the hood. The voting between different clients, etc., they have to be optimized, and this is where like the latest Alpenglow proposal in the update comes into play, which by the way just entered voting I think a couple days ago. And it completely reworks the time to finality, which is very important in any blockchain. Like, how long does it take for a transaction to be present on the majority, the and even like all of the validators, so that no matter which client you're interacting with, you are aware that you have the consistency between like all of them. And something I've heard of, it will bring down block finalization to somewhere around 150 millisecond, down from 12.5 seconds, which is like 100 times improvement. This is only possible again on Solana. I'm a Solana maxi. Please bear with me in this
Well, we
regard.
know you've
But
been building on Solana since 2021, so we understand that.
yeah, exactly. Coming back to maybe even like a couple of other things, even if Hyperliquid, right, is the go-to for perps, and you see even trading platforms like Axiom allowing you to trade on perp, and even like wallets such as Phantom not working with Solana perp dexes, rather integrating Hyperliquid. Sure, but we treat Hyperliquid as basically a CEX. Think of it as Binance without a KYC. At the end of the day, what Matus said, it's still manipulatable. It's still in the control of a funding team, which is not the case for Solana. But yeah, clients all in all, they make the difference in the UX as well.
But they also make a difference in the decentralization, from what I understand. And a lot of Ethereum maxis would argue that, well, we have a lot more clients, therefore it's more decentralized. So, Matus, coming back to your point, because you said that you are focused on decentralization, how does that discrepancy play into your mission to be decentralized?
Firedancer is not the last client that we're going to see. I think there is like much more up and coming. And, we cannot forget that Ethereum has had much more time to build out this ecosystem. And I think it's just a question of time when we get more variety in terms of clients and ultimately more decentralization in the Solana ecosystem and among Solana validators.
George, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I don't want to forget about the transactions per second, the time to finality thing. You can say, sure, it has more clients, but then at some point, why don't you build it sex? Because you have to deal with legal, you have to deal with regulations. If you're doing the settlement on chain, you can entirely forget the execution part and have something like a hybrid DEX, which, to be honest, to me, entirely defeats the purpose of having the D in the DEX, because you cannot be hybrid and decentralized as well, right? And there's a narrative of now having like CDeFi, centralized, decentralized finance, which, like, try explaining it to someone who just understood what DeFi is. Then you have the
Right.
CeFi, the CDeFi. Now all of a sudden you have like L2 spinning up based on Solana because they're using the Solana virtual machine, and maybe even an L1 that is using the SVM, something like Fogo, which promises block size of like, I think it was something around like the 50 to 60 or even lower than that milliseconds per block. But you have to think about the ecosystem in all. Like, as a protocol, as Deriverse, we can allow you to do spot with leverage by integrating with Camino. We can allow you to effectively work with the Circle cross transfer protocol, CCTP, to bridge Circle from different chains. This is something where you have to keep your own bridge if you're building an L2, right? And the execution part. And then at some point, who runs your clients? In our case, we have a heavy bet on what Solana will be building in the future. And we see more and more that Solana back in the days and Solana as of now, the name is the same, the base logic is the same, but it evolves very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it's a very challenging topic to navigate in general because there's this whole debate, right? User experience versus decentralization. And at some point, you have to make certain sacrifices and figure out, like, where will you fit in the market? Speaking of the market, let's talk about what the market looks like on Solana from the DEX's perspective. You guys are obviously building Deriverse, which seems to be very promising, but there's a lot of strong contenders in the space. For instance, Drift. So how are you differentiating yourself from some of these other talented applications?
From my perspective, the most important difference between us and Drift is that we are built in native Rust. Drift is built with Anchor. Anchor is a developer tooling that enables you to spin up smart contracts or programs in Solana in a very easy way. It's very convenient for developers, but as a result, you end up with a lot of redundancies in your Solana programs, which means your transactions are unnecessarily large in terms of compute units. So the biggest difference between us and Drift is that our transactions are much smaller, which has a whole range of benefits. So from a market maker perspective, your Solana transaction on Deriverse is much more likely to land because transactions in Solana queues are prioritized not based on how much, like the tip that you give, but also based on how big they are. And the smaller transactions are included in blocks as the first ones. Another thing is that we have a set of SDK tooling that enables us to basically reduce the time gap between when you as a market maker are able to make an informed decision to executing your trade. So currently we tested it on other dexes. On Solana, it takes something like 1 second, and we are able to push it down to something like 500 milliseconds. One of the biggest value propositions of Deriverse is specifically for market makers, and that the market making environment on Deriverse is the friendliest from among the Solana dexes as of now.
One thing that I can add is we have everything on chain. So it's true decentralization. No matter if you have a TypeScript package published on GitHub and you depend on people running it somewhere in the cloud, we have the execution part. All the liquidation is happening on chain. The funding rate recalculation, which is essential for perpetuals market, is all happen on chain. And in our case, this is the biggest difference because Drift offers mostly perp. Spot most of the times is routed through other venues. And in our case, we have all under one roof. So it's the spot, perp market, fixed maturity derivatives being futures and options. They're all under one single index price. And everything is executed on chain. So if you have a system that is so tightly interconnected between different trading sections, you have to think about it. Okay, what's my single point of failure? Do I have to understand, okay, do I keep different, even smart contracts? In our case, it's one smart contract. And in our case, it's completely permissionless. You, Michael, can spin up a spot market. And if you have sufficient value, it gets automatically upgraded by anyone. You don't have to be in charge for it to upgrade to a perp section. And then it gets upgraded to a futures and options section. And which is basically the whole tokenized asset lifecycle that you can think of in DeFi, when you have perp, perpetual futures, the fixed maturity futures and options. And the entry point being the launchpad, which is completely permissionless. You can create a token, you can bring a token. As long as it lives on Solana, we're good to go.
You mentioned a few features there and how you're differentiating yourself. What are some of the things that you guys are currently working on for the roadmap?
Regarding the public roadmap, it's completely public, and we will be publishing our smart contract and make it generally available for anyone to investigate once we are ready with the audit. But yeah, in terms of like V1 that we are aiming by the end of the year, we will bring everything besides the fixed maturity derivatives. Because in order to have them as capital efficient as possible, you have to build your own spot and perp section first. So this is why we are heavily working with professional trading shops, market makers. We are trying to understand what the retail wants. We just are out of the competition. We had a competition last year, then we reworked our design from a more professional focused to more retail focused UI, and also the UX changed a bit. So we will be going live, of course, with the launchpad, with the token, which is, by the way, essential to the protocol because all the fees are distributed between all the token holders and the pools. So trading fees from spot, from perp, are then funneled into either the pool of a prospective instrument or the token holders. And then the token holders decide to change the base fee rate, which is something you cannot really do on Drift. And tell me what venue allows you to vote and see how it's being voted on in a single smart contract without needing to set up realms or, I don't know, other DAOs that exist out there. You are in the control of the protocol. Of course, we will have initially some values that we are trying to figure out. But one more thing that we also are bringing to the market is a novel fee model, which will allow you to have up to 10 times lower taker fees than on other venues, by having something called a fee prepayment that will allow you to have a discount even on the base fee rate. And even the referral program will be entirely on-chain. So there will be no off-chain components that will govern the referral program. For the referee and the referrer, it will be transparent. And keep in mind, we are in the Web3 world, we are builders, so we have to allow everyone not to trust, but verify. And this is where it all comes to be fully on-chain, fully permissionless, and Solana is the best place where to build those solutions. And I can go as far as saying the only one.
That's a good, bold statement to end on. George and Matus, this was a real pleasure. Thanks so much for educating me. Where can people learn more about Deriverse?
You can go directly to our website, www.deriverse.io, and I think from there you can get to all the relevant resources, and you can as well try our testnet. And if you leave us feedback in our Discord, we'll be very grateful.
Be sure to include those links in the description. And also, by the way, thanks so much for being part of our community network spotlight. For those that are watching, if you are a founder or operator in Web3, please go to networkspotlight.io and sign up to become a member. You'll get to meet folks like myself and other founders and operators that are building amazing things in Web3. Like and subscribe, and we'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye, everyone. If you're a founder or operator in Web3, and want to connect with others like you, head on over to networkspotlight.io and apply to become a member. See you on the inside.